Hello guys, this is your friend What If Naruto, and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto switches his opponents with Shikamaru during the preliminary round part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic, then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And check out my description. And now let's start the fanfic. In the tower at the center of the so-called Forest of Death, everyone's eyes turned towards the board, as the next set of names flashed into place. Kintsuchi vs. Naruto Uzumaki. Huh, it's that sound girl. Naruto frowned slightly as he looked over to his teammate Sakura Haruno. You fought her, right, Sakura-chan? Well, everyone else fought their team. Sakura admitted slowly. All I really know is that she uses Senbon. Don't worry about it. Naruto grinned brightly as he stuck his thumb up at the girl. I'll beat her, no problem. Just be careful, okay, Naruto. Sakura spoke up, her eyes watching her teammate's opponent. Her teammates were both really strong, so she's probably no pushover. Gotcha. The boy grinned before standing up and practically bouncing down onto the tower floor. So, I get the braggart from the first part. Well, at least I didn't have to face the Uchiha. Kin hissed softly under her breath as she quickly checked over her equipment. Though, I wish I was going against that little body-stealing bitch. Shame she was already eliminated. Just get down there and crush the fool. Dosu, Kin's teammate, hissed back at her, glaring with his one good eye. Or Orochimaru-sama will make you wish that you'd suffered Zaku's fate. I know, the girl waved him off before frowning slightly. I just wish I knew what kind of tricks he likes to use. And he's probably thinking the same about you. Dosu grunted. Now go. I'm going already. Kin snapped back as she gracefully darted down to the tower floor before studying the orange-clad boy in front of her, one hand boredly resting on a cocked hip. So, you're the loser I gotta beat to advance, huh? Well, I had been hoping to get that little wannabe ninja, body-stealing blonde bitch, but she had to go and get herself eliminated against that pathetic pink-haired of a teammate of yours. What did you call Sakura-chan? Naruto was glaring at the girl now, his fists clenching into tight fists as an angry pulse of killer intent leaked out onto her. You heard me. Kin shot back, ignoring the way the hairs on the back of her neck shot up in warning. Some part of her knew this was a colossally stupid idea, but the rational part of her mind argued it away as a silly concern. I'm going to beat you, Naruto said with a fire in his eyes as he glared at the girl, then growled in a voice that only she could hear. And then, I'm going to make you tell me about Orochimaru, and what he wants with Sasuke. PSH. Kin waved off the boy's proclamation as she settled into a ready stance. Keep dreaming. Last time you just slept all the way through the fight. Talk about lame. I'll show you. Naruto slid into a ready stance and then yelled over towards an amused-looking Hayate. You gonna stand there smiling all day, or you gonna start the match? Girl. Hayate smirked slightly at the sound nin before coughing slightly into his hand. You really shouldn't have done that. Giving the confused girl a wink, he then looked more serious. Ready. Begin. And with that, suddenly where there was one Naruto, Kin found herself facing 15, swarming at her, quickly pulling out her Senbon. The girl sneered at the figures rushing at her and threw her Senbon at one of the clones. What? You think some clone illusions are going to help you out? Ha! Illusions. One of the clones smirked as he dodged the Senbon as they moved to circle around the girl. Were no illusion clones. Another shot in as they suddenly surged in at the girl, whose eyes widened as she could actually hear the footfalls, the breathing of each of the clones, and with a sudden, panicked look started to throw her Senbon rapidly at the figures. Were shadow clones. Another Naruto spoke up, directly behind her as she could feel how it suddenly grabbed hold of her collar and started to yank her back, even as a clone on either side of her swept out her legs. As gravity took hold, she moved to twist her way out from underneath the clone's grip on her, before she could feel a pair of heel kicks slamming into her gut and chest, sending her crashing down to the earth below. Then, the clone gripping her spotted collar, lifted her up immediately after and tossed her into the air. As she gasped for breath, she quickly attempted to twist away, bringing up her arm to block a knee to her ribs, only to miss the elbow to her head. Even further dazed, her motions grew sluggish as she was bounced between the clones via momentum and gravity, before finally one more spinning heel kick sent her crashing back into an unconscious heap. Hayate Gecko, the stage's examiner and referee, coughed slightly as the dust settled, before crouching down, examining the girl carefully. Winner, Naruto Uzumaki. Several cheers came through the Konoha Nin as Naruto turned around and grinned back at them, offering a thumbs up to Sakura as he watched the medic Nin come to haul Kin's unconscious body away. To the surprise of Sakura and a number of other Nin, Naruto followed them instead of heading back up to the rest of the group. Somehow catching the inquiring look the Hokage sent him, Naruto glanced back at the old man with a shallow grin, the one that always meant he knew he'd have to explain himself. Nodding slightly, the Hokage turned his attention back to the selection board and settled in as the next match came up. Kiba Inuzuka vs. Shikamaru Nara. In a virtually abandoned portion of the tower, Kakashi Hatake stood over his student, Sasuke Uchiha, and examined the cursed seal Orochimaru had inflicted warily. Sasuke, you'd better drop the genjutsu for now, not a good idea to keep it up when you're like this. Kakashi noted as he smiled down at his student, even as he carefully slit his finger and studied the young nin. Sasuke's body, underneath the loose, baggy shirt he wore, was far more slender than a boy his age should have been, his waist, indented slightly, while his hips flared out a bit more than a boy would be comfortable with. The Uchiha grunted slightly as a slight ripple melted across his face, before it softened, becoming completely feminine. The now completely female Uchiha grumbled as he began to feel Kakashi carefully writing away in blood around the cursed seal. Happy, Kakashi-sensei. Even Sasuke's voice was different, as it hissed angrily back at the Junin while slender fingers clenched back against their palms. I still don't see why you're so focused on pretending. Kakashi made a face, before grinning back down at his student. I mean, really, how are you planning on rebuilding your clan, if Itachi first? Sasuke shot back stubbornly as she sat rigidly against the cool floor. You know, that could be taken in a bad way, don't you, Sasuke-chan? Kakashi teased lightly as he watched his student flush with anger as he scrawled down her back and carefully moved it along the floor, up one of the pillars. You know what I meant. She growled slightly as she clenched her fingers tighter against her palm. Kakashi ignored the pulse of anger as he teased his student, finishing his way up the pillar before moving back to start the next path of seal work. Well, considering how jealous you get of Sakura-chan, I suppose I do. Jealous? Sasuke almost squeaked with outrage as angry eyes glared up at her teacher. I have nothing to be jealous of that pink-haired little fangirl. Oh. Kakashi grinned wickedly as he moved the next thread of seal work towards the next pillar. Then I suppose you won't mind that I've planned for Naruto to help her with her seduction training. Sasuke flinched visibly, but made no further reaction to her instructor's comment, grateful that for the moment, he couldn't see the violent twitch that had taken up residence on her right eye before she slowly forced out a response. Why would I care? Of course you wouldn't. Kakashi agreed amiably as he worked his finger up the pillar. Of course, then I'll have to have her work with Naruto on his counter-seduction skills. I might just have them locked away for a few weeks doing nothing but, well, you know. A vein began to slowly throb on Sasuke's delicate forehead as her eyes twitching turned into a visible spasm, her fingers clenching reflexively in time. I see. Really, Sasuke, Kakashi said cheerfully. Would it be so horrible for you to admit you like him? That idiot. Sasuke immediately glared back at her instructor, growling slightly. You're lucky your teammates are such heavy sleepers. Kakashi responded with a happy little eye smile. You talk rather loudly, in your sleep. Sasuke immediately blushed bright red as she opened her mouth like a gaping fish as she struggled to come up with a response to the man. Finally, she just whimpered and hung her head, saying nothing as she just let her teacher finish up his seal work. Oh oh oh. Naruto had followed the medic nin as they laid girl in an empty room, on one of two empty beds, the curtain between them already drawn. Crossing his arms about his chest, he looked her over and frowned slightly. He had no idea how long it'd be until the girl woke up so he could question her about what that snake bastard had planned for Sasuke. Grumbling, he shifted over to the bed next to her, and huffed as he noticed it didn't have a pillow like the girl's. A moment later, he heard the door being opened, and suddenly years of pranking instincts took over, as he quickly transformed himself into the one thing he knew was missing from the scene, the bed's pillow. Quickly suppressing his presence as much as he possibly could, he was aware of a creepily familiar figure entering the room, to chuckle over the girl. Grinning with a merry, predatory smirk, the man had leaned down to whisper an audible hiss to the girl. Foo 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 foo, wake up, little Kin-chan. His eyes gleamed gold as he watched the girl, slowly roused to wakefulness before her eyes split open and wide in fear. Oh Orochimaru-sama. The girl trembled visibly as she stared up at her supposed Junin instructor and went white as a sheet. Now, Kin-chan, I'm very disappointed in you. The man's smile never dampened as he leaned back up, grinning merrily at her as he would lightly brush his fingers through her hair. All that time and training, and tisk tisk, eliminated by a loudmouthed brat. Kin stumbled over a response, trying desperately to think of something, anything she could say to make it up to the man, her eyes watering in fear as she trembled like a mouse before a snake. Fortunately, I understand there's more to that particular loud-mouthed brat than meets the eye. Orochimaru chuckled again, a cold, haunting thing. I had thought the seal I placed on him would have left him helpless. Foo. So, my little Kin-chan, I'll offer you a chance to redeem yourself. What must I do, Orochimaru-sama? Kin spoke up, her eyes still glistening as she trembled, watching the man. Kill the brat before anyone undoes what I did to him. Orochimaru said with a casual wave of his hand before smiling sweetly at the girl. Still, if you fail, and still live, I suppose, I can find a use for you still. Why yes, Orochimaru-sama. Kin nodded quickly, her voice still trembling with fear as she shivered where she sat. Good girl. Orochimaru chuckled again, lightly brushing her hair one moment longer before turning and leaving the trembling girl to compose herself. Don't disappoint me again, Kin-chan. And with that, the snake Sanin just smiled as he closed the door behind him, his cold chuckling laugh echoing through Kin's mind. For a moment, she just sat there, staring at the door the man had left through, slowly processing what he'd said, what he'd meant. Then, slowly she curled her legs back up against her chest, and buried her face in her knees as she began to sob uncontrollably. She was dead, or worse, and she knew it. She never heard the slight sound of a transformation jutsu ending, nor did she see the orange and blue-clad form of her target studying her wordlessly from across the room. Kin was simply in her own world, not caring that she was in the middle of what was technically enemy territory. She knew what Orochimaru did to those that failed him, and she had no illusions that she'd be one of the lucky ones to simply die a quick, merciful death. He always had a use for them. One way or another, he always had a use for them. As her throat hitched, she suddenly felt a warm arm wrapping around her, and her being pulled against a comforting chest. Not even caring who it was, she turned her face and buried it into Figure's chest, and simply cried as she felt the warm arms encircling her. Fingers gently, soothingly stroked her hair, as he made soft, soothing sounds into her ear. Finally, as her sobs slowly died down, she slowly opened her red-rimmed, dark eyes, and saw the orange jacket she'd clutched so tightly. It was then a feeling of dread rippled through her, as she looked up, to see the quiet blue eyes of her target looking down at her as he still held her against his chest. Why you? She cursed herself mentally as she actually squeaked her stammered statement. What? Naruto shrugged slightly, before grinning a bit at her. What's the guy who you're supposed to kill doing here? You heard, she squeaked again, staring at the boy for a moment, as she felt the heavy lump in her chest drop down to her stomach. Any chance she'd had was gone now, she was screwed, completely and utterly screwed. Yup. Naruto nodded his head before looking down at her seriously. He's a real snake bastard, isn't he? Kin laughed dully and nodded her head, before she glared lightly up at him. So, gonna kill me now? Naruto blinked, dully at her for a moment, before jerking back as he stared at her. What? No. Why would I do that? Because I'm supposed to kill you. Kin offered as she stared at the boy for a moment, before shrugging slightly. And it's better than the alternative. Naruto blinked a moment, before looking down at the broken girl in front him, before her face was replaced by another, and he shivered slightly. For a moment, he shut his eyes, forcing down the memories of Haku's final moments, the calm, almost eager acceptance of death on his face. Frowning then, he opened his eyes and glared down at her as he crossed his arms about his chest. I'm not going to kill you. So, what, you're going to send me back to Orochimaru? She growled back at him, glaring slightly as she hissed, fists clenching. You're a real piece of work, you know that. Comforting a girl just so you can turn around and push her off too. She couldn't even finish her sentence as she glared back at the boy, her eyes suddenly filled with hatred and venom. I'm not killing you and I'm not sending you back to that snake bastard, Naruto said firmly as he looked into her eyes. But, you are telling me what he's planning to do with Sasuke. Oh, and if I say no? Kin shot back, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she snarled at him, knowing in truth that she wouldn't really, and hating herself for it. What are you gonna do? Spank me until I do. Naruto stared at her for a moment, his jaw hanging open as he stared at her, before finally it clicked shut as he blushed brightly. What are you, some kind of pervert? Fighting down her own blush at the boy's accusation, Kin sneered back at her. Bah, what kind of ninja are you then, if you can't even do something as simple as give a girl a spanking? How are you ever gonna stomach interrogating a real prisoner in the field, huh? I'm going to be Hokage someday. Naruto shot back, growling angry as he met her eyes with his own brilliant blue orbs. I will do whatever I have to protest this village. Shivering slightly, Kin couldn't help but wonder what the fuck she was doing. She stood up and glared down at the boy, her hand on her hip as she snarled. Yeah, right, you want the information so badly. Make me give it to you. You know what? Fine. Naruto snapped back as suddenly, she was surrounded a group of Narutos and found herself suddenly overwhelmed and bound up tightly by the boy. In some part of her mind, the girl wondered where the hell a kid as apparently innocent as the blonde had learned such good shibari techniques, as she struggled against the ropes that ground into her through her clothes. As she opened her mouth to unleash another barrage of scathing words, she found it stuffed with a bit of cloth and then tied into place as she let out a muffled cry of outrage. MMPH. Like the ropes. Naruto smirked smugly down at the girl. After Sasuke got out of my old ones so easily, I went and read up on the best way to tie someone up. Kakashi-sensei gave me a great book on this stuff. Not sure why they were all about tying up women, or why he kept giggling like he did when I talked to him about tying Sasuke up so he couldn't get away, but they work. Kin stared up at the boy, unsure whether she should be impressed, or outraged at the blonde. MMPH. Boys. Naruto glanced at his clones. Get her back to the base and stand guard. Don't let her escape. I'm gonna go watch the rest of the matches so I know what's going on. Right, boss. The clones quickly agreed, as they hauled the indignantly squawking Kin up and immediately proceeded to vanish out the window, as they raced across Konoha. Nodding in satisfaction, Naruto turned and walked out of the room, contemplating what he'd overheard from Orochimaru about what had been done to him. Oh, what did I miss? Sakura-chan? Naruto asked as he sat down next to his teammate just as Lee jumped up onto the statue and began to remove his weights. Where have you been? Sakura growled slightly at her teammate before sighing just a bit as she huffed and crossed her arms about her chest. You missed Kiba and Akamaru beating Shikamaru, and Hinata pretty much forfeiting against her cousin at Kiba's urging. So, it's bushy brows versus no brows now? Naruto asked as he felt the whole tower tremble slightly at the after effects of the released weights. Wow, that's a lot of weight. Yeah, Sakura agreed in slight awe as she watched how Lee suddenly seemed to blink around Gaara. Oh wow, he's fast. Really fast. Naruto agreed and stared in slight awe as he watched Lee go to work. So, where have you been? Sakura growled slightly as she rounded in on her teammate again, glaring angrily at him. Oh, I went to the medical wing. He responded simply with a shrug before looking back at the fight. Kick his fuzzy brows. Oh. Sakura blinked slightly, before studying the boy. Did you see Sasuke-kun? Huh. Oh. Naruto shrugged neutrally as he slumped slightly in his seat as he realized he hadn't even bothered to look at his teammate. No, I didn't. Taking his dejection the wrong way, Sakura smiled slightly to her blonde teammate. I'm sure Kakashi-sensei just took him to another part of the tower. I'm sure he's fine. Right. Naruto agreed as he turned his attention away from the match for a short bit. Say, Sakura-chan, those sound ninja, what do you think that creepy snake guy wants with Sasuke? I don't know. Sakura admitted softly as she reached up and lightly hugged herself as her gaze left the fight in front of her. But whatever it is, it can't be good. I'm gonna find out, Naruto said with a soft bow. No matter what, I'm gonna find out. Sakura stared at the boy for a moment, before slowly and carefully nodding her head. Okay. While their attentions had been focused on their conversation, the match ended with as Guy intervened to save his badly beaten student. Seeing this, Naruto's eyes widened in shock, staring at the almost petulant rage Gaara exhibited at being denied the death of his opponent. Shaking his head with a growl, he turned his head and instead studied the way the final member of the Sound Ninja was acting. The one-eyed Dosu seemed fascinated by Gaara's display, before he turned his head, catching Naruto's stare and glaring angrily back at the blonde before flicking his one eye to Choji. Naruto followed that glance and frowned as he realized that Akamichi was the only remaining ninja left to fight. As the final match flashed across the board, and Asuma worked on bribing his student into taking part, Dosu hissed lightly as he walked past Naruto. Something you want, brat? That single eye glared down at the boy, who stared back defiantly at the Sound Nin. Yeah, you can tell that snake bastard that she failed, and I'm going to find out what he wants Sasuke for. Naruto shot back. What are you talking about? Dosu paused, genuinely confused as he stared at the boy. Of course she failed, you already beat her. He'll know what I mean, Naruto said with a stubborn glint in his eyes. Whatever. Dosu snorted dismissively as he moved down to the tower floor while Sakura stared curiously at Naruto. What were you talking about, Naruto? Sakura's face was strangely concerned as she looked over at her oddly serious teammate. Ma, nothing to worry about, Sakura-chan. Naruto waved off her question with a sudden, bright grin on his face, before he winced quickly when he watched Choji slam into the wall. Ouch, that had to hurt. That even more so. Sakura agreed as she watched Dosu use his melody arm on Choji's body, knocking the boy quickly out. Poor Choji, and poor Ino, her whole team got eliminated. Yeah, Naruto nodded his agreement as he remained in his subdued mood, his thoughts racing over just what he'd have to do to get the information out of Kin. The only team in our age group that made it this far that doesn't have at least one person advancing. All right, I need all the winners to come down here and draw numbers for the final stage. Hayate called out quickly, prompting Naruto to nod to Sakura before plastering a grin on his face again and jumping down as he quickly pulled out a number from the offered bag. Once everyone had drawn, the matches for the third stage were displayed. Tamari of the Desert vs. Naruto Uzumaki. Shino Aburame vs. Kankuro of the Desert. Kiba Inuzuka vs. Dosu Kinuta. Gaara of the Desert vs. Neji Hyuga. First round by Sasuke Uchiha. Naruto looked over to where his opponent sneered back at him and shook his head. Ma, why is it I keep having to fight girls? Tisk. Better you than me. Shikamaru snapped, before shrugging slightly. Ah well, at least I don't have to worry about any extra training. Training? Naruto frowned slightly before looking over at where the Hokage nodded down to the participants, then began to walk away. Coming to a decision, Naruto waved to his comrades, then raced off after the old man. Hey, old man, Naruto called out as he quickly caught up to Sarutobi. I need to talk to you. Yes, Naruto. The Hokage smiled down at the boy, before blinking slightly as he saw the serious expression on his face. I can't do anything about the matches if that's what you want to talk about. Nah, I might ask if there's anyone in the village who can help me train against wind attacks like that girl uses, but there's something else I wanted to talk to you about. Naruto replied quickly as he looked carefully around them. Something? Well, I'm pretty sure it's important. Oh, what? The humor in the man's tone was gentle as it touched Naruto's ears. Orochimaru. Instantly all traces of humor left the Hokage's face, as a grim look set on his features. Yes, I heard about your team's encounter with him during the second stage. Don't worry about your teammate, Kakashi is taking care of him, and what was done to him. That snake bastard didn't just do something to Sasuke, Naruto said with a soft frown. The last thing I remember before I blacked out was him hitting my stomach, right where you know what is, and a lot of pain. Then he said he put some kinda seal on me. What? Sarutobi instantly froze as he looked down at Naruto, his voice like steel as he spoke. Naruto, are you telling me you encountered him again? He didn't know I was there, but yeah. Naruto spoke up. I had gone to try and find out about what the bastard wanted from Sasuke from Kin, when I heard someone coming in reflexively transformed like I used to hide from the Anbu. The Hokage chuckled a bit at that and offered a knowing nod. Go on, what did he tell her? That he was disappointed in her. She was really scared at that, but impressed with me. Surprised I was able to do what I did with the seal he used on me. Naruto paused a moment, thinking carefully before he continued. Oh, and he then told her that the only way she could redeem herself was to kill me before anyone found out what he'd done to me. What? Sarutobi's eyes widened in surprise before he snapped out an order. Anbu. Yes, Hokage-sama. A pair of masked nin immediately appeared, kneeling before the Hokage. I need you to locate the sound nin Kintsuchi, she has. The old man quickly began before Naruto cut him off. Relax, old man. Naruto cut in with an amused grin on his lips. She's not gonna try and kill me. And how do you know that, Naruto? Those eyes had narrowed into slits as he regarded the boy he'd been so protective of for so long. Because I've got her tied up and gagged at my apartment. The blonde offered up a sheepish grin to the village leader. We kinda sorta, well, she thought I was gonna kill her at first. Naruto began to babble as he scratched the back of his head sheepishly. Then she thought I was going to send her back to Orochimaru. Let me tell you, she was pissed and I think kinda scared at that. Then when I told her I wasn't going to do that, but that she was gonna tell me what the snake bastard wanted Sasuke for, well, he blushed, brightly and trailed off. Well what, Naruto-kun? Sarutobi asked gently as he looked down at the stammering, embarrassed boy. Kinda sorta, well, Naruto blushed even brighter before a rush of words streamed out of his mouth. Agreed Spenkatu to her. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the professor, stared down at young Naruto Uzumaki as he slowly worked his mind through what the boy just said, before slowly and carefully repeating it back to him. You agreed to spank it out of her. The purple-haired Anbu could be heard to snort in amusement as a soft, obviously feminine whisper slipped out. Kinky girl. Naruto only blushed brighter as he nodded in answer, before reluctantly explaining. Well, you see, it started out with her asking me or what, you'll spank it out of me. When I said she was gonna tell me what Orochimaru wanted from Sasuke, and well, you, being you, refused to back down, and accepted her challenge. Palming his face to hide the amusement he found in the situation, the man slowly shook his head. Only you, Naruto, only you. Old man, what'll happen to her after she tells me stuff? Naruto shifted uneasily again as he looked up at the man. Well, Naruto, typically an enemy nin sent to assassinate one of our own, is interrogated, then put to death. Sarutobi said with a firmness to his face, before his eyes twinkled slightly. But, you could also claim her as a spoil. A spoil? The confusion was evident as the boy asked his question. Short for spoil of war. The purple-haired Anbu woman spoke up in way of explanation. Basically, she becomes your tool, your property, your slave, and your responsibility. You can do anything you want with her, she has no rights at all. But, you're responsible for whatever she does. The woman shrugged slightly. It's only rarely done, because of that reason. Most shinobi don't want to take the chance that a captured enemy nin won't eventually turn on them. Though, I'm sure Jiraiya might be able to come up with something to mitigate that, Sarutobi noted with a curling smile on his lips. We just couldn't let it become widely known. So, either I kill her, or make her my property. Naruto sighed slightly, his shoulders slumping just a bit. Great. Well, Jiraiya is in town anyway. The Hokage commented, instantly causing the purple-haired Anbu's head to snap up. I'll have him stop by your apartment to take a look at what Orochimaru might have done to your seal, and possibly what can be done with the girl. Ah, right, Naruto said, shifting slightly. Is there, anyone I can, talk to, about the you know? Well, since Anbu-chan here is so knowledgeable. The Hokage grinned down at the suddenly worried-looking woman. I'm sure she'd be happy to help you, Naruto. Casting the old man a dirty, if resigned look from beneath her mask, the Anbu woman then noted the hopeful look on the boy's face as he spoke up. Really? Anko-san might be a better choice, sir. The woman put forth hedgingly. I'm certain. You'd leave me alone with crazy examiner lady. Naruto stared in horror at the woman. I can see the wisdom in your words, Anbu-chan. The woman instantly felt her heart drop into her stomach at the third's words, a feeling of grim expectation washing over her. But, then again, Naruto does have a point as well, so, I'm assigning you the task of escorting Anko to Naruto's apartment, and chaperoning her, aid in the girl's interrogation. Yugo Uzuki fought down the urge to bang her head against the nearby wall as she acknowledged the third's command, yes, Hokage-sama. Tied up in Naruto's apartment, Kin felt a shiver of pure dread race down her spine and instinctively knew that she was in trouble. Meh, why do I have to help out the brat here? Anko Mitarashi grumbled softly as she jerked her thumb in Naruto's direction, her eyes glinting in displeasure, ignoring the way he glared back at her. Because the Hokage ordered it. Yugo responded simply from behind her mask. Didn't he tell you to do it first, then you suggested her? Naruto spoke up, lightly glaring at the Anbu woman himself. Yugo couldn't help but twitch slightly beneath her mask, thankful that neither of her companions could see it. Possibly. Ya know, Yugo. Anko drawled slowly as she glared at the purple-haired woman. I'm now liking this even less. Well, here's the question. Yugo shot back, as she didn't look at the girl. Would you rather not be in on the interrogation of one of Orochimaru's pawns by the guy she was supposed to assassinate? I'd rather be interrogating the snake bastard's corpse. She shot back. Preferably after it's been burned to ash and I've had the chance to piss on it. Huh. Naruto blinked slightly as he looked at Anko curiously before looking back at Yugo. I take it she's met him. Met him. Anko growled back at the boy, her jaw clenching as she snarled. I was that traitorous shit's apprentice. Then, He decides to go batshit crazy, experimenting with people, including me, and then leaves me behind to deal with the pissed off villagers. Do you have any idea what that's fucking like? Naruto twitched slightly, glaring even harder at Anko before growling at Yugo. Forget her. Just tell the old man I didn't want her around. And with that, he pushed ahead, vanishing over the rooftops in a burst of speed that took Anko off guard. What the fuck's the brat's problem? Anko snapped, glaring at Yugo just in time to see the hand that smacked her upside the head. Does he have any idea what it's fucking like? Yugo growled softly as she glared at Anko. Don't you recognize who he is? The loudmouthed brat from the second part of the exam. Anko offered, looking genuinely confused. And, ow. Yugo growled even louder as she grabbed hold of Anko's ear, and dragged the woman over to an unoccupied section of rooftop, ignoring the cursing and threats the woman threw back at her as she pushed her up against the wall. That's Naruto, Naruto Uzumaki. Ring any bells yet? Fucking ow. Anko hissed as she rubbed at her ear. And, vaguely. What's 3 times 3, Anko? Yugo deadpanned, glaring slightly at the apparently thick-headed woman. This isn't SCH ow. Anko whined softly as Yugo smacked her upside the head with the flat of her hand once more. 9. It's fucking 9 all right. Very good, Anko, now tell me, what's the thing about that number that Konoha hates? The purple-haired woman drawled out as she glared at the woman from behind her mask. The 9 tails. What do you know, you do have a brain in there. Yugo spat, the sarcasm heavy in her voice once more. Now, put that together with Naruto Uzumaki. 9 tails and the brat. Why? Oh, shit. Anko's eyes widened in realization. He's the 9 tails brat. And you went off on him, the one person in this village who knows what it's like, probably better than even you do, to have everyone look at you with hatred and mistrust. Yugo growled as she glared at the suddenly shrinking woman. So, do you know what you're going to do, Anko? Apologize. Anko offered up lamely even as she continued to shrink away from the woman. You're going to get down on your hands and knees and beg if you have to. Yugo growled as she grabbed hold of her sword meaningfully. Am I clear? Yes, ma'am, Anko squeaked out, staring up at the suddenly, rather scary Anbu woman. Good. Yugo released her sword and then offered up in a sweet little voice. Now, come along, Anko-chan, we still have an interrogation to help with. Right. Anko shuddered slightly. As crazy as she wasn't about to piss off Hayate's girlfriend. Oh, about time you showed up, boss. One of the clones complained as he sat down next to the annoyed-looking kin. We were getting bored. Naruto just shot the clone a look, glaring angrily at the ninjutsu creation, before he shifted that angry glare down onto a suddenly rather nervous kin. For a moment, he just studied the girl, his face scrunched up in anger, as he lightly clenched his fists before speaking. Ya know, I'm in a rather bad mood right now, so I'm going to remove that gag and give you a chance to just tell me what I want to know. Reaching down, he did just that, watching as the girl worked her dry mouth for a moment, even as she glared back up at him. The frustration and fear that had been distilling in her since she'd been trussed up and left here surged forward over rational thought. What? All that talk and you just back right back down? Man, you fucking leaf ninner just path oomph. Naruto shoved her gag back into place as he glared even harder down at her, jaw clenching before he moved over to one of his chairs and took his seat. Bring her over here. The clones nervously picked up the girl, and as they ignored her struggles, brought her squirming down across the original's lap. This time, he didn't offer her another chance to escape, didn't give her a chance to answer. Instead, she was faced with the sympathetic face of one of his clones as she felt herself being held down into place, before the first, heavy smack fell down on her. She jerked, or at least tried to. The heavy fabric of her loose pants softened the blow, taking away the sharp sting of impact that flesh on flesh would have had. Still, she was being spanked of all things. And what's more, it was her own damned idea. Ya know, brat, it works better if you pull down her pants first. A familiar voice echoed through the apartment, as Kin's eyes widened even more. Not only was she getting a damned spanking, but he invited over a fucking audience for it. What do you want? Naruto's voice was flat and strangely cold as his hand rested on the curve of Kin's rear, reflexively squeezing and kneading the tender flesh as he stared at where Anko leaned back in one of his window sills. Ma, here to apologize, and do what I was supposed to do. Anko shrugged slightly as she leaned back against the window frame. I honestly didn't realize who you were. So, sorry. It was a lame finish, but the genuine regret did show through in her eyes. Fine. Naruto admitted grudgingly before he looked down at the brightly blushing Kin. I'm sure you remember the crazy examiner lady who likes to cut me open and lick my blood, Kin-chan. So, this is one of the bastard's new little playtoys, huh? Anko slipped out of the window and sauntered over to Kin in a slow, swaying fashion, her movements a screaming echo of Orochimaru's. He always did like his girls pretty. Meh. The window sill itself had been quickly filled by the leaning form of Yugo, her masked face studying Kin's shame as she leaned her sword lightly against the wall. It just kept getting better and better for her, didn't it? Not just one, but two more people to see just what it was her damned mouth had gotten her into. You'd know better than me. Naruto responded with a shrug as he eyed the woman. You're the one that was his apprentice and everything. Kin's eyes bulged out even wider at that revelation, as a slight little whimper of fear erupted into the air through her gag. Seeing the reaction, Anko's smirk grew even wider as she nodded in confirmation to the girl. Oh yeah, I've known the bastard longer than you little darlin'. And well, her smirk only grew as she slipped her finger down and slowly traced her finger along the girl's jaw. Guess where I work, My, she certainly looks ready to talk now, doesn't she? Yugo noted blandly as she crossed her arms in front of her chest. Maybe you won't have to give her anything else, The hope blossoming in Kin's eyes came crashing down at Naruto's words. Already offered her that chance. Said something about being all talk and then backing down. He paused a moment, before shrugging as he added. And I think she was about to say Leaf Nin were pathetic. Huh, well she's got a point about backing down if you've said you're going to do something. Anko pointed out with a smirk, before her eyes hardened into a predatory gleam. And I do believe we need to correct her about whether or not we're pathetic. Kin gulped, audibly as Naruto nodded to Anko's words. You said it works better without her pants. He was blushing, brightly, not that Kin could see at the woman's words while the clone in front of her winced in sympathy. Bare flesh hitting bare flesh, kiddo. Anko paused a moment before lightly tapping her lower lip. Though, we could always get you a paddle or a crop. Kin violently shook her head at that, staring up with wide eyes at the predatorily grinning woman as she felt Naruto undoing her pants, then pulling them down her legs as he responded. I don't think she likes that idea. Ma, gimme a couple of weeks and I could change that. Anko leered visibly at the girl who did her best to shrink away from the woman, even as her simple, black boy short panties were revealed. Huh, I'm almost disappointed. From hearing about her suggesting you spank her, I thought she'd be kinkier than that. Cute though, Naruto commented absently, even as he blushed even brighter. So, I suppose I should. Well, you have a choice. Yugo spoke up, her voice coolly neutral as she leaned back against the frame, studying the girl behind that white mask. You can either just jerk them down, or if you're feeling adventurous and wanting to prove a point, rip them off completely. Ooh, no from personal experience. Anko leered back at the purple-haired Anbu. I mean, I knew that there was more to Hayate than there seemed, but damn. Kin seemed to shrink down on Naruto's lap as the two women so casually discussed the topic, whimpering softly as she tried to look up at Naruto, pleadingly and failed. Those were the only pair of panties she had available to her. Not since there was no way in hell she was going back to where she was staying. As always, You're a pervert, Anko. Yugo shot back and looked at the girl. It all depends on what message you want to send. The woman paused a moment, seeming to consider things before shrugging a bit. And since her only choices now are death or becoming your spoil, either way, she doesn't really need them. The cool pit of dread in her stomach sank even further as the girl whimpered loudly in her gag, a sound that only grew when Anko spoke up. Ooh, well now, is that true, brat? You looking to claim the bad little nin girl from the bastard? Stealing himself, while still blushing furiously, Naruto grabbed hold of the back of those panties, then with a sudden rush of strength, Kin's muffled shriek filled the air as he ripped them away from the girl's body, leaving her completely bare. Well, that depends on Kin-chan, now doesn't it? Very true. Anko grinned wickedly at the now brightly blushing girl as she would carefully stroke her chin. Give her to me for a bit, and I can guarantee which one she'll pick. Bad Anko. Yugo chided as she smirked beneath her mask. You remember what Ibiki told you about how hard you are on your toys? Kin gulped even more, before a muffled shriek escaped her lips as she felt a sudden, hard, stinging swat on her. Immediately, she began to wriggle as much as she could, before she could feel another, harder smack down on the opposite cheek as Naruto chided her lightly, the blush slowly starting to fade from his face. Very, very slowly. Stop that. This is what you wanted, remember, Kin-chan. Groaning softly, Kin hung her head slightly, before she could feel Anko's fingers casually removing her forehead protector with a smirk. Well, brat, you don't want this as a souvenir, do you? Not particularly. Naruto agreed, glaring at the symbol engraved on it, as he gave Kin a harder smack on her. Whatever the end result, little Kin-chan isn't going to be wearing that, ever again. Right. Anko agreed before pursing her lips lightly. Then, we'll just have to arrange for her death, as it were. A little bit of her blood, some tears, drop it off with that last teammate of hers and well. That's if she talks. Yugo pointed out as a muffled squeak could be heard when another spank struck the girls. If she doesn't, we can always just turn her back over to Orochimaru. Quote. Anko added with a speculative gleam in her eyes. Bear asked, well spanked. Would be quite the sight. Yugo agreed as Kin violently shook her head, tears starting to stream down her cheeks. You're the expert on him, Anko. What do you think he'd end up doing to her, for that kind of failure? Ooh, that's a tough one. The unmasked woman stroked her chin thoughtfully. Well, he'd probably chuckle at it, he is a sadistic bastard after all, then he'd end up killing her. Anko pursed her lips. Thing is, I'm fairly certain he wouldn't be quick about it. Knowing him, some of his more painful experiments. He's never been big on forgiving mistakes. Naruto's hand struck firmly against Kin's backside then, causing her to squeak loudly as she cried into her gag, before she could feel him lightly stroking his fingers through her hair. I'm sure Kin-chan is going to tell us what we want, and then some, right, Kin-chan? The girl nodded softly. There really wasn't much point to it, she already knew she was doomed. She'd known as soon as Orochimaru had appeared to her in the medic wing. And she'd known she'd tell them everything as soon as she realized the boy she was supposed to kill had actually offered her comfort instead. It had only been her pride that had kept her holding out as long as she had. She could feel the clone carefully untying her gag again, before she slowly worked her jaw, tongue sticking against the dry insides of her mouth as she slumped but didn't say a word. A glass of water was then lightly pressed to her lips, before carefully being tilted back, as she drank greedily from it. All the while, she felt the boy gently stroking his fingers through her hair. All right then, girlie. Anko pulled over a chair and sat down, looking into her eyes. Start talking. And, as she was lifted up into the boy's lap, her pants pulled back up over her aching body, she offered no resistance, actually curling slightly against his chest, as she did just as Anko ordered. She talked, and she talked, and she talked. Oh. Anko whistled softly as Kin finally finished explaining what she knew, the former Sound Nin's face tired as she leaned limply against Naruto. The orange-clad boy had already brushed the tears from her eyes and the still-bound girl was resting as comfortably as she could against his chest. From her position at the window, Yugo had to admit, it was a cute sight. In a completely kinky master and pet kind of way. Damn, he has been busy. Body jumping, turning our allies against us, planning an invasion. Anko shook her head again and smirked slightly at the girl. So, what's it going to be, girl? Anko leaned back in her chair and studied the girl. She had to admit, she made a cute sight. Execution, or, not like I have much choice. Kin muttered quietly even as she kept her face buried against Naruto's jacket. Death or slavery? A clean death, or spending the rest of your life as the brat's pet? Anko chuckled slightly, as she shrugged just a bit. Either is better than your alternative. No shit. Kin hissed as she closed her eyes and sighed, as Naruto had stayed uncharacteristically quiet throughout the exchange. How would you execute me? She almost winced as she felt the rigid tension ripple through the boy she was leaning against, even as she ruthlessly fought down the urge to reassure him that she wasn't going to take that option. Still, she was impressed when she heard him retain his silence, not seeing his jaw clenched and his eyes closed as Anko and Yugo could. Still, she just continued to lean against him, laying her head against his chest as he managed to keep up the steady stroking of her hair. Poison, with a sedative. Put you to sleep, then smother you or drain you out. Anko pursed her lips lightly as she looked over at Yugo. Beheading isn't clean, probably could have Kurenai use a genjutsu. Kin nodded her head, not quiet opening her eyes as she rolled the decision around in her mind. They were better deaths than she really could hope for, better deaths than a captured nin would get at Sound. Strangely enough, that comforted the girl as she slowly nodded her head. Fine, then I know what I'm going to do. Anko arched a brow slightly back at the girl. Personally, she wasn't quite sure what she'd have done in the girl's situation. She wanted to say that she'd have chosen the clean death, but, a part of her pointed out, if she had someone like the brat, holding her, comforting her as she spilled her guts, betraying a village that offered no loyalty back to its own shinobi, would she? A part of her knew she didn't have an answer. If I ask you to, will you be the one to kill me? Her eyes had opened as she brought her gaze up, and looked into the conflicted blue orbs of the boy holding her. He froze then, as his mind fell back, to a bridge, and another set of brown eyes and a pretty face. As Anko and Yugo hissed softly, their eyes flashing with anger, Naruto lightly reached up, and brushed his fingers against Kin's cheek, tears slowly flowing from his eyes, as he nonetheless, nodded his head as he gave a single, simple answer, echoing the one he'd given Haku. Yes. Kin nodded her head, still staring into the boy's eyes, before she spoke in a soft, quiet voice. Then, I'm yours, Naruto-sama. For a moment, she said nothing more, merely staring at his eyes, before she spoke another, tentative word, as if to feel how it tasted on her lips. Master. Naruto sighed softly in relief before he collapsed, bonelessly back into his chair, while he wrapped his arms about the girl, and held her tightly to his chest. Memories of his friend, even if it had been a fleeting thing, rose unbidden in his mind. Watching as Haku had died, just so Zabuza could live long enough to avenge him. Arms tightened more firmly around the girl, even as he nodded and spoke in a soft, hoarse voice. Then you're mine, Kin-chan. Anko and Yugo shared a look, a brief look of understanding in their eyes before nodding to one another. Turning back to the boy, Anko spoke up. All right kid, we've got to go report all this to the Hokage. She stays tied up until we get it official and Jiraiya does whatever it is he does. She paused a moment, before studying the kid. Look, how about I go pick up something for you two to eat? After things are squared away with the old man, I'll explain how this is going to work. Ramen? Naruto asked hopefully, his eyes shining as he blinked away his tears. Ramen, Kin giggled slightly, before her stomach growled ominously. With bright blush on her face, the girl turned her head and buried it again against his chest. Fine. Ramen it is. Anko rolled her eyes slightly as Yugo was glad her mask hid the wicked glint of amusement in her eyes. Though, it'll take longer, I want my dango, damn it. Fine. Ichiraku's. Naruto grinned slightly, his eyes glimmering. Just ask M for my usual beef, please. Kin spoke up, before looking at Anko with slightly pleading eyes, and some dango. Gah. Anko stared back at the pleading look in the girl's eyes and felt her resistance melt as she grumbled. Fine. Ramen and dango. Turning her head, she glanced towards the Anbu girl. Come on Yugo, let's get this taken care of. See you soon, kid. Yugo lifted up her sword before falling out the window and vanishing as she leapt to a nearby rooftop, Anko following her through the window a moment later. As soon as the women were gone, Kin looked up and smiled, sheepishly at the boy. Naruto-sama. Yes, Kin-chan. I've got this itch, could you help me scratch it? Oh. You can handle informing the Hokage and Ibiki about what's going on, right? Anko spoke up, as she bounced across the rooftops next to the Anbu woman. Yes, something on your mind? Yugo responded back, curiosity in her tone as she smirked beneath the mask. Not trying to get out of getting them their dinner, are you? Nah, the kid's on Kakashi's team, right? Anko had a look in her eyes, distant and speculative all the same. Something about the kid's reaction. I wanna check something out. Just don't forget to get the kids their dinner. Yugo shot back, and chuckled just a bit. We gotta introduce Jiraiya to the brat, and I'd rather have an extra pair of eyes, and hands to hold kunai when I'm dealing with him. No problem, Yugo-chan. Anko shot back with an amused smirk on her lips. I'll catch you back at the brat's apartment. Seriously, don't forget the ramen. Yugo warned as she raced off towards the Hokage's tower. I mean it. I heard you. Oh. Yo, Cyclops. Oh, hey Anko, what can I do for you? Kakashi offered the woman a smile as he respectfully put down his book and placed it carefully back in his vest. It had only taken 3 copies and lengthy stays in the hospital for snake poison for her to get that particular point across. That Uzumaki brat's on your team, right? Anko watched as a sudden note of protective caution entered the man's eye as he lazily nodded in response. Yeah, good kid. The Junin nodded his head, before he fixed Anko with a hard, penetrating look that bore down on the woman. Why? He ever had anything happen to him on a mission? Anko paused a moment, lips pursing as she debated how to broach the subject for a moment before ruthlessly pushing forward. Like, an enemy ninja asking him to kill them. Kakashi stared at the woman for a long, quiet moment before with a slight, curt little nod of his head, he gave her a single-word answer. Wave. Did he do it? The woman pressed quietly, staring up at the one-eyed man, as her normal exuberance faded completely. He didn't get the chance to. Hands in his pockets, the man turned his head and looked over to where his sensei's stone face looked out across their village. I don't know all the details, but the kid connects to people, I don't know how, but he does. The kid's name, as I understand it, was Haku, and with the care Naruto gave his burial, he must have met him before the fight, even if he didn't know it until the end. I think if he could, he would have done anything to save the boy. For a moment, Kakashi let a speculative silence fall between them, before with a slow sigh and a slump of his shoulders, he continued. But, the whole situation was bad. Haku ended on the wrong end of a Chidori, to save the life of his master. The master who then gave his life to kill the employer that had put them in their situation and betrayed them. I see. Anko nodded to herself, in a look of understanding and a slight bit of satisfaction. That explains a few things. Pursing her lips, she studied the man in front of her. What are you going to do about his training for the tournament? Was planning on having Ebisu help him get a much better grasp of his basics. Kakashi shrugged just a bit. Honestly, I'm worried about Sasuke. You heard that he got a match to yours, right? Unconsciously, Anko's hand slipped up, rubbing at the base of her neck as she growled softly but nodded. Yeah, I heard. So, you're focusing on the Uchiha brat. He's going to have to face that sand kid, or the Hyuga if he gets past the others. Kakashi pointed out. I can give him a better chance at surviving. Hey, Naruto isn't going to have an easy time either. Anko pointed out with a slight smirk on her lips. That sand girl is going to be tough, and if he gets past that, well, if your students live up to the hype, it might just come down to the two of them at the finals. If it goes that long, Anko mentally added. I know. Kakashi sighed slightly and shrugged helplessly. Kurenai's in a similar position, but both of her students have clans to fall back on and help them out. Naruto and Sasuke. You could always ask Asuma to help you out. Anko smirked slightly and shrugged just a bit. He could give the kid some ideas on how to handle a wind user like the girl since he doesn't have a student in the finals. Hell, we could even see what his element is and go about working on that too. She paused a moment, before grinning viciously at the man, and tell me, are the rumors true about what the kid can do with the shadow clone technique? Yeah, it's more than a little scary to be honest. Kakashi responded, before arching a brow as he smiled at the woman. And, Anko. I've got reasons of my own now to help the brat out. Anko shot back, before slightly hanging her head as she quietly admitted, a blush on her cheeks. I kinda, really fucked up with him. Forgot about his burden and ranted to him about what Orochimaru put you through and how people couldn't understand. Kakashi gave her a bemused eye smile as he watched her blush even brighter. How did you? You did the same thing with me. It was a simple reply as the man's eye crinkled slightly in amusement. Yeah, Anko grumbled slightly before suddenly grinning, viciously at the man. That and I really wanna see how things work out with him and his spoil. That's nice. Wait, what? Kakashi stared at the grinning woman in slack-jawed amazement. Ask the Hokage about the details. Anko shot back, with a triumphant grin. I've still got to get the brat some dinner. Spoil. Kakashi almost squeaked out, before he recovered a moment later. Oh boy, Naruto. One last thing, have you taught the kid the shadow clone trick? Well, you see. I'll take that as a no. Anko rolled her eyes just a bit before sighing slightly. Come on, Cyclops. All that kid's potential, and you're just letting him squander it. This isn't wartime, Anko. Kakashi countered with a slight frown. There's no reason to push them into things as fast as some of us were. Ya know, that's where you're wrong, Kakashi, Anko said quietly as she started to leap away. There's a very good reason for us too. She left Kakashi behind, to ponder her words. Oh. Hey, I'm supposed to pick up some food for that Naruto kid. Anko spoke up as she sat down in front of the stand. He said something about his usual. And I also need a beef ramen to go with it. Oh ho. Tsuki Ichiraku looked down at the woman and smirked slightly. I hope you brought a sealing scroll then. You're gonna need it. Anko paused a moment, considered what she knew about the brat, before groaning softly as she hung her head and banged it lightly against the countertop. How bad? Oh, his usual. Is he up to 6 or 7 bowls a yame? The old man asked his daughter, a light twinkling in his eyes. 7, I think. Cammy knows where he puts it all. The girl shook her head and sighed slightly, before studying the groaning woman in front of her. You're the woman who's always hanging around the dango shop. Up. Anko agreed slightly as she muttered under her breath about purple-haired, sword-wielding bitches being out to get her. Do I have enough time to go pick some up? I get the feeling I'm going to need it once I see the bill. Ayame giggled out a laugh and nodded her head. Oh, I'm sure. It's nice to see Naruto-kun making new friends. She paused a moment, before frowning just a bit. Those teammates of his never seem to come by with him very often, though, I see that Uchiha boy likes to come in at times and sit in Naruto-kun's seat. Huh. Anko pursed her lips a bit and arched a brow at the girl. Well, considering everything that Brat's been through, he's probably more than a little reluctant to get close to anyone. I mean, hell, his brother killed the rest of his family, his entire clan along with them. I know. The young woman sighed softly and shook her head as she looked off down the street. That boy, he and Naruto-kun could really help each other, if he could let Naruto in. Who knows? Anko shrugged slightly before she stood up. I don't know too much about the Uchiha, other than that old Cyclops is more worried about him than Naruto. I can see some of the logic in it, I think he's too focused on keeping them from ending up like he is, he's holding them back. Wasn't he? Ayame turned her head, looking up to where the fourth's face looked down, sternly out across their village. Yeah, I remember a bit about what Kakashi was like back then. Anko paused a moment, looking at the fourth's face herself. I think he's taking what his teacher wanted him to learn out of context, but I can't hardly blame him for wanting his kids to have some childhood. She shook her head before offering the young woman a slight smile. I'll be back in a moment for the order. Ah, of course. Ayame bowed her head and smiled at the woman, before frowning slightly in realization. I'm sorry, but can I ask your name? Anko. The woman smiled back at the girl, as she looked back over her shoulder, before throwing her a smirk. It's Anko. Oh, yes, right there. Kin's voice bounced off the apartment's thin walls as she shuddered slightly in relief as her eyes fluttered closed. Oi, I leave you brats alone for a few minutes and what do you start doing? Anko's voice rang out through the apartment as she watched Naruto blinking rapidly, before he blushed and quickly pulled his hand away from where it had been up underneath Kin's shirt, on her back. Scratch her itch. Naruto offered blandly as he twitched slightly at the soft giggle Kin gave off as she lay easily on the ground. Then I see you two are hitting it off marvelously. Anko almost laughed loudly at the sight of how brightly the boy blushed, while Kin giggled slightly, then frowned just a bit. What are you doing to me? The girl pouted slightly as she carefully rolled over and sat up, sending a mild glare at Naruto. I just giggled of all things. So, Naruto blinked slightly a bit taken aback by the glare. I thought that's what girls did. That's what stupid, vapid little bimbos do. Kin corrected with a glare as she growled slightly. The ones that would rather be working on looking pretty than being a good ninja. Naruto blinked slightly before glancing over at a bemused-looking Anko. Did that make sense to you? Of course, brat. Anko chuckled softly before lightly petting him atop his head. She's just being silly. Oh, okay. Naruto shrugged a bit before he reached down and picked Kin up, ignoring the slightly angry squawk of protest she made. I am not. The girl growled slightly even as she glared mildly at Naruto. And put me down. Naruto opened his mouth as if to speak, before frowning slightly as he gave Kin a look. The girl's temper cooled rapidly as she suddenly remembered just who she was talking to. Blinking slightly, she swallowed, loudly before managing to squeak out, I'm sorry. Feisty little bitch you've got there, kid. Anko smirked as he unrolled a scroll then spread it out across the table, and bit her thumb to activate the seals on it. Sure you're up to handling her. Setting her down in an empty seat without a word, Naruto then turned and pulled out his own seat as he watched the bowls of ramen and the trays of dango appear. Smiling slightly, Naruto bowed his head to Anko. Thank you. Yeah, thanks and all, Kin spoke up, as she practically drooled over the food, before coughed pointedly, but, could I have my hands untied? A little hard to eat without them, you know. Well, we could always have the brat here feed you. Anko smirked as he watched the boy blush brightly again, before he shrugged slightly and smirked a bit. I could, but, shouldn't she be feeding me? Naruto asked innocently as he looked over at Kin with wide, blue eyes. Kin twitched slightly, before growling slowly, darkly as she glared back at the boy who only grinned happily back at her. He's got you there, kid. Anko pointed out and smirked slightly as she rested her elbows on the table and caught her chin on her hands. My, you two are certainly going to be interesting. She lightly turned her attention towards the lightly glowering Kin, and her expression grew serious. Look, you made a choice, now you have to live with it. You're his property. Get used to it. If he tells you to do something, you will have to do it. Doesn't mean I have to like it. Kin slumped slightly back down into her chair as her rear slid forward to the edge of the seat. Oh, really now, you're telling me that you wouldn't like slinking over, settling down on his lap and getting nice and comfy against his chest, before you started to slowly feed him. The woman practically purred her words out as her eyes glittered slightly in teasing amusement, her grin only growing as Kin blushed a bright red and dropped her chin to her chest. Can I please be untied? The girl almost whispered the words as she spoke, her voice tinged with soft resignation, as in a show of slight confusion, Naruto looked questioningly towards Anko. Well kid, until things have been finalized, she has to be kept trussed up. The woman grinned back at the kid and chuckled slightly. So, I'll let you have a choice, you can untie her arms and she eats in your lap before we tie her back up, or, you feed her. Well, Naruto blinked, obviously not too comfortable with the situation as he looked back at Kin, almost questioningly. Lap. Her face was blushing brightly as she couldn't meet his gaze, her body shifting slightly in response. I'd rather sit on his lap than be fed, please. Ah, good, you can feed him too then. Anko responded cheerfully as she grinned back at the girl, who sighed softly and hung her head even further in tired resignation. She just couldn't win with this woman. Oh. Kin was staring in disbelief at the stack of bowls next to her as she lightly chewed on a stick of dango. Turning her head, she carefully looked at the blonde boy she was carefully settled atop and couldn't help but ask. Where do you put it all? What did ya mean, Kin-chan? Naruto looked confused as he lightly rubbed his stomach in satisfaction. All that ramen. Kin responded before pointing lightly at his stomach with her dango skewer. How can you possibly fit all that in your stomach? Always just do. He shrugged a bit before glancing down at where the girl was sitting comfortably in his lap, and then blushed brightly. Hey, enjoying yourself, brat? Anko teased with a grin, her eyes practically dancing with mirth as she watched how both of them blushed a bit more, though her grin grew slightly when she watched Kin wiggle subtly back into the boy's lap. Ma, so tell me, what skills do you have? Well, I can do the basic stuff, well, 2 of the 3 academy techniques. Naruto blushed brightly as he hung his head. Could never do the clone technique. They all, well, with a sigh he muttered under his breath and hung his head before making the seals, and suddenly a trio of sickly clones popped into existence, each of them falling to the ground uselessly. Why I failed the exam 3 times. But, Kin blinked slightly, she'd been beaten by a guy that failed the exam 3 times. But he even younger than she was. You used a shadow clones. Anko corrected casually as she snatched a piece of dango into her mouth. Brats apparently shit at the regular clone technique. Shadow clones though, it's a technique that only a Junin usually has the chakra for. Even then, nobody's supposed to have the chakra to make them a viable combat technique like the kid here. Really? But, Naruto flushed slightly as he hung his head, then sighed softly. Anyway, I have the shadow clones, and, he suddenly blushed even brighter as he looked at the 2 women, before finishing lamely. And I can do tree climbing. Really? Leaving out your famous cage killer. Anko teased the boy, her eyes dancing with mirth as she laughed slightly when his blush threatened to turn him redder than a boiled lobster. Cage killer. Kin arched a brow, a look of curiosity on her face as she looked down at the boy on whom she sat. Oh ho ho ho. Anko laughed, eagerly as she watched how the boy refused to respond, before she leaned over the table, and whispered into girl's ear. Kin's face immediately reddened before she glanced down at the nervous-looking Naruto. Pervert. Hey. Naruto whined softly as he pouted in turn. I'm not a pervert. I only used that technique on perverts. It's still a perverted technique. Kin huffed slightly and crossed her arms across her chest. Girl, trust me. Anko smirked back at the huffing former sound nin. When it gets down to it, women can scream and rail against perverts all night long. But, it won't change the fact that there's a lot of enjoyable things that can come out of them being that way. Kin opened her mouth, then shut it with an audible click as she blushed slightly and then carefully nodded her head. Anko chuckled softly as she shook her head in amusement as she looked at the still blushing blonde boy and the also blushing, but slightly dumbstruck girl on his lap. Well, you're certainly an interesting one, brat. Smirking softly, she pulled out a piece of paper, and handed it to the boy. Channel some of your chakra into that. Huh, why? Naruto blinked a moment then shrugged as he took paper from Anko and stared at it a moment. Just do it, brat. Anko grinned slightly as she watched how he shifted his grip about Kin's waist to balance her better against his waist as he held up the paper. I want to see something. Okay. Naruto shrugged just a bit before concentrating hard on the piece of paper, letting his chakra flow through it, only to stare in shock as it suddenly split in two. Cool. That was a chakra nature test, wasn't it? Kin spoke up, her face still tinged with red as she looked over at Anko as she picked up one of the halves and focused some of her own chakra into it, and smirking just a bit as the paper crumpled to dust in her hand. Huh, a wind nature with an earth nature for a pet. Anko chuckled softly as she let off a slight laugh. That should be interesting. Leaning forward, Anko grinned viciously all of a sudden. I talked to Kakashi while I was out, kid. Turns out he's not going to have time to work with you too much. He's worried about your Uchiha friend and wants to make sure that he doesn't lose it. Naruto's face scrunched up a moment, before slowly, reluctantly he nodded his head in acceptance. I guess. I can understand that. Suddenly his eyes were burning as he jabbed his finger out towards Anko. But that doesn't mean I have to like it. That bastard always gets all the extra help. Ma, relax, kid. Anko waved her hand lightly. Kakashi was planning on foisting you off on Ebisu, to focus on your basics. Though, Kakashi has been your sensei how long? I'm curious, what has he been teaching you? Team training. Naruto paused a moment, his face scrunching up in thought. And tree climbing. That's it. Kin shifted slightly, staring at her master incredulously. You're taking the Chunin exam and that's all the training you've had. Good enough to get me past you. Naruto crossed his arms against his chest and leaned back, scowling angrily as Kin maintained her perch on his lap. I can't believe. Kin glared at the boy a moment before reaching up and pinching the bridge of her nose before looking pleadingly at Anko. Please tell me you've got a better plan for training him. No way I want my master to be an ignorant moron. Hey. Naruto pouted into his scowl as he glared slightly at Kin. I do just fine on my own. Oh ho. Kid does have fire, doesn't he? Anko grinned at the kid for a moment before pursing her lips. So, I take it you train a lot. Yeah. Naruto nodded quickly and eagerly. Every chance I get. Can't slack off if you want to be Hokage. True enough, kid. Anko pursed her lips for a moment, before leaning back. Well, from what I understand, you don't know the secret bonus of the shadow clone technique. She grinned softly as she looked over the boy. If you did, well, the things you could do. Huh, the secret to the shadow clones. Naruto stared wide-eyed at the woman, confusion written on his face. Anko practically purred as she grinned at the boy. For most people, it's not worth much at all, but for you. Her eyes practically shone with glee as she looked him over. Oh, for you, the things you could accomplish. What are you talking about? Naruto looked at the woman in confusion as he stared at her, his eyes uncertain, while Kin looked positively intrigued. Here. Anko scribbled a note on a piece of paper then folded it up. Make a clone, have him walk outside, read this, then disperse. Okay. Naruto made his usual sign and a shadow clone quickly popped into existence before snatching the note out of Naruto's hand and darting outside. A short time later, Naruto blushed brightly, before he glanced at Kin then stared at Anko. I have to do that. Well, unless you plan on her going around. Anko grinned happily at the boy, her lips curled back into a vicious little smirk. Now, have you figured out the secret to the shadow clones? Naruto's brow furrowed for a moment, thinking it over before slowly realization hit him. I learn what my clones know. Bingo, kiddo. Anko grinned viciously as she looked the boy over. Which means, kid, we can put you through literally years' worth of training in the month we have. She paused a moment before shrugging just a bit. Well, years of chakra and elemental training at least. Physical training and taijutsu you'll still have to do the hard way. Ah, okay. Naruto nodded, a bit unsure of exactly what she was saying. Sighing slightly, Kin lightly poked him on the shoulder. You have your clones work on your chakra skills and manipulation, while you work on your taijutsu and conditioning. Oh, that makes sense. Naruto nodded his head before leaning back just a bit. I'm not bad with taijutsu. I just, guess I never really got past academy stuff. Kin huffed slightly as she lightly glared at the boy. Well, now you know what's coming. So, the question is, what are you going to do about it, huh? What do you think I'm gonna do about it? Naruto stared at her incredulously before shaking his head. Train. What did you think I was gonna do, sit on MYS? Well, I think she might have been thinking that you'd be enjoying your new spoil. Anko chimed in, grinning broader at the momentary look of incomprehension that fell across the boy's face, before he suddenly blushed brightly in realization. Wah, but I'd never make her do that. Naruto immediately protested, his eyes growing wide in shock. What? You saying I'm not pretty enough? Kin glared at Naruto slightly even as her arms crossed her chest and she fought down the pout threatening to tremble across her lower lip. Naruto opened his mouth for a moment, then promptly shut it as he turned his attention to Kin and glared at her slightly. Do I need to spank you again, Kin-chan? The girl blinked a moment, before blushing brightly as she hung her head and squirmed slightly on his lap, her legs rubbing firmly together. Maybe. The boy stared at her a moment, before reaching up and palming his face with a groan. You're a pervert, aren't you? Almost immediately Kin's mouth slid open to protest, before she paused a moment and considered as she lightly rubbed her chin. Finally, shrugging just a bit she leaned back against Naruto's chest and shrugged a bit. Guess I am. Huh. Go figure. Anko stared at the two a moment, before bursting out laughing as Naruto hung his head and sighed while Kin just seemed to smirk slightly in response. Well, at least she's smart enough to admit it, huh brat? You were bound to figure it out eventually. Ya know, I think I could have actually ignored it for quite a while. Naruto countered quickly as he would close his eyes lightly and then grunt just a bit. So, do you have a plan for helping me train? Oh yeah. Anko's voice practically purred out as she rubbed her hands together. And it's going to work out even better than I thought. Shifting slightly, she grinned back at the boy even as she pursed her lips and considered. I might even grab Tenzo for some help. The plan, Naruto put forth, glaring slightly at the woman as he huffed just a bit. Well, I was planning on convincing Asuma to help your clones work on your elemental and chakra training with his team, while I worked on you with your taijutsu and physical conditioning. Anko paused, before turning her head and grinning viciously at Kin. You good with those, Senbon kid? I wouldn't be using them if I wasn't, now would I? The girl countered as she huffed just a bit, before blinking slightly as realization hit. Wait, you want me to? It's training. Anko quickly bobbed her head up and down. As long as it's for training, and you have his permission to do it, you can hurt him. You want her to hurt me? Naruto glared, angrily at Anko as he growled slightly. Actually, I want her to throw Senbon at you until you learn to dodge. The woman smiled with a predatory cheerfulness as she chomped another piece of dango. Probably with some weights on to get you faster. And don't worry, I'll be throwing plenty of things at you as well. Naruto stared at the two for a moment before pausing, rubbing his chin. It'll help me get better. Yup. Anko grinned brightly at the boy, nodding her head eagerly. All right. Naruto nodded and grinned brightly as he looked back at the woman with a look of steely determination in his eyes. I won't let that bastard Sasuke get ahead of me. Excellent. Anko steepled her fingers together and grinned a hungry, almost predatory grin. 1 month, working you into exhaustion. Ha. Naruto smirked back at the woman and grinned. We'll see who ends up exhausted. Just then, a knock was heard on the apartment door, and Naruto's eyes narrowed slightly before frowning just a bit as he glanced over at Anko. The woman shrugged back and grinned as she savored another bite of her food. Well, remember brat, the Hokage should be sending someone over. Oh yeah. Naruto blinked slightly before frowning just a bit as he looked at Kin, then at Anko. Could you hold her while I'm answering the door? You could just make a clone, you know. Anko countered with a smirk, grinning at the flushed look of annoyance on Kin's face. Oh, blushing slightly as realized her point, the boy popped off another shadow clone, who walked over to the door and opened it up, to reveal a white-haired man and the still masked Yugo. Yeah, oh, hey Anbu-chan. The clone waved slightly before looking up at the seemingly amused man. This the guy the old man was talking about? Rude brat, isn't he? The man chuckled a bit as he squatted down, squinting his eyes at the before shrugging slightly as he grunted. All right, let's have a look already. You'll need to see the boss then. The clone shrugged slightly before stepping back from the door. I'm just a clone. Really, Jiraiya? Yugo drawled as she pointedly pushed at the man with her scabbarded sword. I thought you knew the kid's a master of the shadow clone technique. Well, I didn't think he'd be rude enough to answer the door with one. Jiraiya shot back with a light glare as he stepped into the apartment before blinking slightly at the sight he beheld. Well, excuse me for being occupied and stuck where I am. The real Naruto shot back as he growled at the man. I was told to keep her secure until you finally showed up. Huh. Sensei wasn't kidding, was he? Jiraiya chuckled softly as he studied the boy, then the girl perched on his lap with her hands in her lap, blushing slightly. You really asked to have the information spanked out of you, girl. Kin blushed even brighter as she hung her head and buried her face in her hands. Cammy, I'm never going to live that down, am I? Nope. Anko agreed with a grin as she smirked at the girl. You'll always be the girl who wanted to be spanked to us. Gee, thanks, Kin spat back, the sarcasm heavy in her voice. Just what I always wanted. Jiraiya blinked a moment, then actually giggled as he pulled out a notebook and quickly scribbled away in it. Ooh, that's a good idea, perfect. Yes, yes, yes. Do. I even want to know. Naruto cringed slightly as he watched the man practically drool over his notepad. On second thought, I know I don't want to know. Looking over at Anko, he sent her a pleading look. Isn't there anyone else? Oi, brat. Jiraiya glared at the boy for a moment before looming over him. Don't you realize who I am? A gigantic pervert. Naruto offered up as he shrugged a bit. Naruto-sama does seem to have a point. Kin added helpfully as she leaned back against his chest, smirking slightly. He's got you pegged all right. Anko agreed with a smirk as she lightly twirled the dango skewer in her fingers. That does sum you up quite succinctly, Jiraiya. Yugo noted as she leaned back against the wall. You didn't all have to agree with him. Jiraiya grumbled slightly, before shrugging. And you're wrong, I'm not a gigantic pervert. I am, a super pervert. He actually admits to it. Naruto stared incredulously at the man. He writes the Ika Ika series. Anko supplied helpfully. The book Kakashi-sensei is always reading when he's supposed to be teaching us. Now Naruto was really glaring at the man, growling softly, before his voice whined out. Are you sure there's no one else we can get? This guy's already made my life enough of a pain in the as it is. The females of the group noticed the slight flinching wince Jiraiya made as the boy's comment struck a bit closer to home than it should have. Shaking his head, Jiraiya snorted slightly before he squatted down. Just get over here and take off your shirt, brat. You guys won't let him do anything perverted to me, right? Naruto said nervously as he lightly lifted Kin off his lap. Damned straight brat. Anko agreed as she threw a wink at Kin. That's your girl's job now. Kin blushed brightly but hung her head and sighed as she slumped down onto the chair and grumbled a bit. Gah, what have I gotten myself into? I'll get to you next, girly. Jiraiya snapped, his voice already layered with suspicion. They might believe you, but I'm not as easily convinced you've really forsaken my old teammate. Kin blinked slightly as Naruto was taking off his jacket then his shirt, standing bare-chested in front of the man as her eyes suddenly widened. You're that Jiraiya? She paused a moment, before looking over at Anko. Huh, I thought anyone that could piss off Orochimaru that much would be more to look at. Anko laughed as she nodded back to the girl, her eyes gleaming slightly. Yeah, kinda disappointing, ain't it? I thought the same thing. It gets worse once you catch him peeping on you the first time. Yugo added as she lightly adjusted her sword behind her back. And he doesn't learn his lesson. Girl. Jiraiya's voice was laced with amusement as he glanced over at the females assembled around him. Tsunade couldn't make me stop. You really think you've got a better chance than she did? Turning back to Naruto, he hummed slightly to himself. Now, mold some chakra for me. Fine. Naruto did as he was asked and glared slightly down at the man in front of him. You were really that snake bastard's teammate. Jiraiya nodded as he studied the seal that came into place. Ah, 5-point seal. Been having trouble with molding your chakra, kid. And like I said, I'm Jiraiya, of the Sannin. Me, Orochimaru and Tsunade Haim were all on Sarutobi Sensei's Genin team. Looking up, the man smirked slightly. Close your eyes, kid. Huh, why? Naruto blinked in confusion, as Jiraiya held his hand behind his back and grinned at the boy, before he reluctantly did as he was told. Easy, so I can do this. Release. And with that, the man slammed his open palm into the boy's gut, and dispelled the seal Orochimaru had placed. Naruto bounced back slightly, landing on his as he glared at the man. Damn it, that hurt. Lemme at him. Kin was growling slightly as she glared at Jiraiya, even as she struggled against an amused Anko's hold. Gimme a Senbon, a kunai, anything. Got yourself a feisty little bitch, don't you, kid? Jiraiya chuckled as he glanced over the girl, then frowned a bit as he stroked his chin. Well, Sensei said he wanted something to ensure your pet's loyalty. Scratching the back of his head, he suddenly let out a perverted giggle. Ooh, and do I have just the thing? I never got to test it out, but never found an enemy kunoichi, dumb enough to let you capture her. Anko offered as Kin slowly, and reluctantly calmed herself, still glaring back at the man. Ma. Jiraiya waved his hand dismissively. Why would I want to burden myself like that? It was just a passing fancy I had a while back. He paused a moment, before grinning lecherously. I was doing research into possibilities for one of my books and... Stop. Yugo spoke up in a clear, firm voice as she glared mildly at the man. We don't need to hear about your perverted pursuits. What's the seal and what does it do? You're no fun. Jiraiya pouted slightly before grinning at the group. Well, it's a rather complex and in-depth creation. One of my finest pieces of work, really. It could even theoretically get rid of one of Orochi's cursed seals. He paused a moment, before grinning sheepishly. I just can't figure out a way to make one that doesn't make the person the property of someone else. Still working on that part of it. Anko twitched slightly, as she growled at the man. So, basically, all this time you've had a way to get this damn things off of me, but, to do it, I'd have to be someone's fucking slave. Hence, why I never mentioned it to you. Jiraiya responded with a helpful smile on his lips. I really didn't want to get your hopes up, plus, I have no clue how well it would work, and since I don't really have any of his test subjects to try it on. I hate you. Anko sighed and twitched slightly as she slumped down into her chair and glared at the man. And the next time you piss her off, I'm not stopping her from putting her Senbon in your balls. Jiraiya gulped, audibly as he noticed the vicious grin on Kin's face. Right. It's a binding seal. It ties the recipient to a specific master. They can't be more than a certain distance away from them without unpleasantness. He paused slightly and pursed his lips, ignoring the slight twitch his words elicited from the women. Ma, knowingly disobeying the master causes pain, obeying feels good, master has a general idea of where the slave is, the slave shares in the master's discomfort, if their master dies, the slave dies, that's about it. That's a thorough seal. Kin noted, slightly nervous, before she paused and took a slow, deep breath and moved back into Naruto's lap. How far away from Naruto-sama will I be allowed to be? Oh, depends on the master. Jiraiya smirked slightly as he glanced at the girl. I'd imagine the kid could give you a pretty far leash with how much chakra he has. He paused a moment, before grinning back at the girl. Or, he could keep you in a pretty tight one too, all up to him. Leash? Kin asked, arching a brow as she crossed her arms about her chest and glared at the man. Do I look like a dog to you? Well, at least a bitch. Jiraiya grinned back at the girl before waving his hand off as she hissed angrily at him. Ma, give me a few to get my notes and we'll get you set up so sensei will allow you to go about unbound. Jerk. Kin growled softly as she glared lightly at the man before grumbling slightly as she crossed her arms about her chest then settled snugly up against Naruto's chest. Yeah. Jiraiya chuckled softly as he waved his hand casually before pulling out a scroll and grumbling just a bit. Let's see, where did I put it? Those are all of your notes. Kin was nonetheless a curious creature as she glanced over the scroll before blinking slightly. Wow, that's a lot of storage seals. Jiraiya nodded absently to the girl. Well, I have a lot of notes that I keep. Was it this one? A slight nick in an application of chakra popped out a notebook full of pages. After a quick perusal, the man pushed it back to the scroll and with a poof it was stored again. Ma, not that one. This could take a minute. Kin stared at the seals for a moment before sighing wistfully and leaning back against Naruto's chest. Jiraiya quirked a brow slightly, before grinned as he caught the girl's reaction. Her master, on the other hand, took a look at the seals, then had simply let his eyes slide off of them. He definitely didn't seem to be taking after his father in that manner, at least. Much more like his mother there. Shaking his head, he chuckled just a bit to himself before focusing on finding the appropriate notes as he listened in on the conversation. All right, brat. Anko grinned softly at the boy as she settled back, studying him intently. I've still got to clear things with Asuma, but we'll get one of the bigger training grounds. Part of it for your clones and your chakra and wind element training, the other. You yourself with me and your little pet bitch here. And after that? Jiraiya asked curiously as he continued to rummage through his scroll. What do you mean, after that? Naruto glared back at the man and grunted softly. I mean, once he's exhausted his chakra and you've worn him out for the day, what are you going to do with him? Jiraiya directed the question to Anko, smirking slightly as he ignored the look of anger boiling up in the boy's eyes. Ma, not sure yet. Anko shrugged slightly and stretched as she leaned back, pointedly ignoring the way the lecher leered at her chest as she did so. Got some ideas, you old perv? Well, I have been known to have some decent teaching methods. The man pointed out tightly as he smirked just a bit at the woman. Remember, Ma, knowing you, you'd probably want something stupid like. Anko paused a moment, her eyes flickering over to Kin before glancing back at the sage. Trying to get him to pull out its power. Naruto flinched slightly and seemed to shrink back into his chair at the woman's words. Blinking in confusion, Kin looked inquiringly over at Anko. Can't tell ya kid. Anko shrugged just a bit. In fact, only 2 people are allowed to, legally. Otherwise, well, I'd rather not end up executed, thanks. Kin furrowed her brow, pieces slowly fitting into place as she considered what she knew. Turning her head, she looked down at her master. If Orochimaru had a seal that could fuck with just anyone's chakra, he'd use it a lot more often, especially on us if it was that easy to dispel. Frowning again, she watched how the boy flinched once more, but said nothing in response. Which means, he couldn't just place a seal on you and have it fuck with things. So there has to be something unique about you. Her eyebrows furrowed tighter, as she suddenly realized she had Jiraiya's full attention. The man was grinning at her, expectantly, patiently, as if waiting for her to puzzle it out herself. Go on, kid. Just because we can't tell you, doesn't mean you can't figure it out, if you can, that is. Well, I'm not some kinda seal master, you know. The girl huffed back as she sighed, frowning tighter as she puzzled over the information. I'm missing something. Seals? Can seals interfere with one another? She paused before frowning again. But that would mean you already had a seal. When Naruto flinched in response, the girl blinked again. Obviously not a cursed seal. Orochimaru wouldn't dream of creating something that interfered with his own favorite mark. You got a prize there, kid. Jiraiya laughed softly. She might be a handful, but she's actually got a mind behind that pretty face. Of course she does, you old pervert. Naruto snapped back, growling slightly. Why would I want an idiot? Kin blushed softly as she immediately glanced down at her where her hands had settled into her lap, before frowning just a bit more. Slowly, hesitantly she looked up and studied Naruto for a moment, before pursing her lips. Seals do just that, or redirect things. Redirect, store, she blinked slightly as she studied the boy a bit closer. Jiraiya smirked even wider as he watched the girl's eyes slowly widen, before pausing as she stared at the boy. Jinchuriki. Naruto flinched visibly at the word, but still reluctantly nodded his head. But, I thought Konoha gave away all the demons. Kin blinked, slightly confusion written across her face, before sighing. Of course, that's just what everyone's told, so who knows how accurate that is. No one was even sure the Kyuubi existed until it. That caused a slow click of revelation to cross the girl's face as she turned around and practically gaped at the boy whose lap she occupied. Turning her head, she glanced at the various adults looking back at her. An amused-looking Anko, smirking back at her, a strangely proud-looking Jiraiya, and an unreadably masked Yugo. Oh Kami, what have I gotten myself into? Welcome, officially, to the madhouse, kid. Anko laughed softly as she chewed on her dango skewer. You're now officially the youngest person, not the subject of the secret, to find out. Not the subject of the secret. Kin blinked slightly as she then turned towards Naruto, staring even more even as she frowned slightly when she felt his arms fall away from her body. You didn't know. Not until the night I earned this. Naruto responded simply as he jerked his thumb up to his forehead in a sluggish, wooden motion. One of the academy instructors used me to try and steal the forbidden scroll, and then spilled the beans before trying to kill me. For a moment, the girl studied the boy, watching him before coming to a decision. Reaching down, Kin wrapped her arms about the stiff, distant boy, before she quietly whispered into his ear. I'm not going to leave, Naruto-sama. So, I take it I should keep looking for those notes? Jiraiya asked cheerfully before grinning at the slight glare the girl gave him. Yeah, glare at me all you want, kiddo, you want to stay. You get the seal. Fine. The girl huffed slightly but nodded nonetheless. I'm sticking with him. Good to hear. Jiraiya smirked softly before glanced at his scroll once more. Ah, here we are. Pulling out the notebook in a flash of smoke, he nodded to himself and carefully started flipping through its pages. So, what's the girl going to be doing while the brat's training? Throwing sharp, pointy objects at him. Anko spoke up, a happy gleam in her eyes as she leaned back in her chair. What more could a girl ask for? Ma, like I said, I don't trust her still. Jiraiya glanced at the girl out of the corner of his eye, studying her, glaring slightly in resignation as she continued to lean back against the boy's chest. Plus, I want to ask her some more questions. Some things I want to clarify about my old teammates' actions and methods. Naruto growled warningly as he glared back at a smirking Jiraiya as he lightly clenched his fingers. You expect me to leave her alone with a pervert like you? I'm sure Hokage-sama wouldn't mind me chaperoning Naruto-kun. Yugo offered casually as she meaningfully ran her fingers along the pommel of her blade. Just like I'm sure Jiraiya-sama will be on his absolute best behavior. Isn't that right? Well, right. Jiraiya sweated slightly as he glanced at the smiling Anbu mask as the woman spoke in her cold, calm tone. Anyway, I'll work with the girl while you're working with the brat. Once you've run him out of chakra, bring him to me. He needs to see about learning to harness its power. Didn't I just? Anko started to growl out as she glared at the man. There are things that are going on that you don't know about, Anko. Jiraiya shot back with a suddenly cold tone. The kid's going to need to be ready to deal with it. And he'll need every edge he can get. He paused a moment, before frowning a bit and shrugging. I have to admit though, I wouldn't have thought of the elemental training. I would have just had him do something like water walking and up from there with a bunch of clones until he drained his chakra. We'll be doing both I think. Anko glanced over at the boy. Most of them working on his wind chakra, with a couple working on chakra exercises. Keep things a bit diversified, she paused, before smirking evilly at Naruto. But, man, are you going to have a headache when we're done? Jiraiya actually laughed at the determined expression on the kid's face as he crossed his arms across his chest and stared back at the group defiantly. Bring it on. Oh, this is going to be fun. Was echoed in stereo, before Jiraiya and Anko looked at one another with a look of dawning horror as they realized they'd been echoing once another.